What do you do when the people who threw you away knock on your door 20 years later, smiling for cameras and calling you their little girl? They think I'm still desperate for approval, easily bought with fake tears and a $2 million check. They have no idea I spent my youth building a cage just for them. Tonight, under the lights of 40 million live viewers, the doors will lock. Welcome to the truth. Hello to the wonderful audience of Daisy Revenge Stories. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating. If you find today's story captivating, please consider supporting us with just $1 so we can pay our hardworking team to cover their living expenses and continue creating these stories for you. You can donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the link in the description or comments of this video. My name is Natalie Larson. I am 29 years old, and I am looking down at the sprawling, glittering expanse of Los Angeles from the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. The city lights look like scattered diamonds in the dark, a fitting view for someone who deals in shiny, expensive secrets. I am the founder and the host of the highest-rated live investigative show on Etheria Stream, a digital network so massive it makes traditional television networks tremble. Every Friday night, millions of people tune in to watch me tear down corrupt billionaires, fraudulent celebrities, and untouchable politicians. They call me the new power of American entertainment media. But long before I held the power to destroy lives on live television, my own life was destroyed in a quiet, immaculate room in Colorado. I grew up in an excessively wealthy suburb of Denver. To the outside world, my parents, Richard and Eleanor Larson, were the picture of suburban royalty. But behind the manicured lawns and the imported luxury cars, they were consumed by a hollow, gnawing hunger. They were obsessed with fame, completely infected by a desperate desire to pry their way into the exclusive circles of the Hollywood elite. They did not want children. They wanted stepping stones. My twin sister, Chloe, was their perfect investment. From the moment she could walk, she was styled, coached, and paraded around like a purebred show dog. She was beautiful, hopelessly compliant, and perfectly willing to play the role of the smiling porcelain doll. She spent her days memorizing audition lines and wearing itchy designer dresses, desperate for a crumb of our parents' affection. I, on the other hand, was a completely different species. I detested the blinding flashes of the cameras. I refused to smile on command. More dangerously, I was fiercely independent and far too observant. Even as a child, I noticed the final warning notices from banks buried under glossy magazines. I had a terrible habit of asking very loud, uncomfortable questions about the towering stacks of hidden credit card debt that funded their glamorous lifestyle. I was a liability to their brand. When I was 9 years old, they decided to cut their losses. The abandonment did not involve any shattered glass, bruised ribs, or screaming matches. I almost wish it had. Instead, it was a masterpiece of cold, calculated, procedural cruelty. I remember the day perfectly. Eleanor and Richard dressed themselves in immaculate, dark, tailored suits, as if they were going to a highly important corporate merger. They put me in the back of their pristine luxury SUV and drove me to a drab, beige, state-run residential care facility. I sat on a cheap plastic chair, swinging my legs, while my parents sat across from a tired social worker. They did not cry. They did not hesitate. We simply cannot provide the specialized medical and educational care she so desperately requires, my mother stated smoothly, her voice dripping with practiced sorrow. I watched my father pull out his expensive gold pen and calmly sign away his parental rights. I watched my mother hand over the paperwork. Their legally binding excuse was a spectacular, breathtaking lie. I had no special needs. They simply needed a legal loophole to dump me into the foster system so they could funnel every single remaining dollar, every cent of their maxed-out credit, into launching Chloe's acting career. To their country club friends, they spun a much more elegant, tragic narrative. They drank expensive wine and wiped away invisible tears, claiming they had sent their troubled daughter to an incredibly prestigious, highly disciplined boarding school in Europe. She was simply too rebellious, too wild, and she ran away from the academy. My father would tell his golf partners with a heavy sigh. They played the victims perfectly. They left me in a system designed to swallow children whole, but they made one fatal miscalculation. The system did not break me, because the system gave me Margaret Vance. Margaret was not like the other caseworkers. She was a woman of quiet authority, unshakable calm, and terrifyingly sharp intelligence. She took one look at my file, looked at the 9-year-old girl staring defiantly back at her, and saw right through the Larson family's immaculate lies. Margaret did not just pull me out of that grim facility and legally adopt me. She forged me. In the years that followed, Margaret taught me that anger is useless if it is not focused. She taught me how to read financial records before I was in high school. She showed me how to weaponize my intellect, teaching me that undeniable, documented truth is the ultimate ammunition in a world built on illusions. She took an abandoned, discarded child and systematically transformed me into a relentless, unbribable machine built to hunt down the truth. She gave me the tools to build my empire, and now, 20 years later, that empire is exactly what my biological family is desperately trying to claim. The machinery of my network was a beast that never slept. 2 weeks ago, EtheriaStream unleashed the promotional campaign for my season finale. It was the most aggressive and expensive marketing push in the platform's history. Digital billboards dominated Times Square. High-definition banners hijacked every major social media feed, and my face was plastered across the sides of city buses from coast to coast. The tagline flashed in bold. Unforgiving Neon. Natalie Larson. The new power of American entertainment media. The trailer featured rapid-fire cuts of corrupt corporate executives squirming in my interview chair, promising that my next live broadcast would be the most explosive takedown of the decade. It was loud. It was uncompromising, and it was the perfect bait. It took exactly 24 hours, 2 decades of absolute, undisturbed silence, broken just one day after my face became the most valuable digital real estate in the country. I was sitting in my glass-walled corner office, reviewing heavily redacted legal briefings with my production team. When my executive assistant stepped into the room, she looked thoroughly perplexed. She held up a blinking phone line, informing me that there was a woman crying hysterically, claiming to be my long-lost mother. I signaled for my team to leave the room. I pressed the flashing green button, and the show officially began. Natalie? Oh my God, my sweet girl, is it really you? The voice was older, thinner, but the theatrical vibrato was exactly as I remembered. Eleanor Larson had always possessed a profound, dangerous talent for the dramatic arts. I leaned back in my heavy leather chair, letting the silence stretch across the line just long enough to make her sweat. "Hello, Eleanor," I replied, my tone entirely flat, deliberately stripped of any emotional resonance. Immediately, the waterworks escalated into a torrential downpour of manufactured grief. "We have been looking for you for 20 years," she sobbed through the speaker, her voice breaking with practiced precision. "We spent millions of dollars hiring the absolute best private investigators in the country. We scoured the globe, darling. We never stopped leaving the porch light on for you. When your father saw that trailer on the television, he completely broke down and wept. We just want our family back together. We want you home." It was a phenomenal performance. If I were a normal, emotionally starved child desperately seeking closure from the people who discarded me, I might have fallen for it. I might have believed the trembling sincerity in her voice. But I did not interrupt her. I let her spin her tragic tale, while I casually swiped across my secondary monitor, pulling up the highly confidential dossiers my investigative team had compiled months ago. The truth, as it almost always is, was written in the red ink of financial ruin. I knew exactly why they were suddenly so desperate for a family reunion. The Larsons were drowning in a spectacular fashion. Their boutique investment firm, Larson Capital, was a sinking ship rapidly taking on water. My screen displayed the undeniable, hard evidence. They were teetering on the absolute edge of a massive institutional default, staring down the barrel of tens of millions of dollars in toxic, unpayable debt. The aristocratic facade was cracking into pieces. And then there was Chloe, the golden child, the flawless, perfect investment. The acting career they sacrificed me for had fizzled out before it ever truly began, leaving her to desperately rebrand herself as a hollow, vapid lifestyle guru on social media. She posted endless, highly filtered videos about aura cleansing, organic detox regimens, and finding your inner peace, but her engagement metrics were in a terrifying freefall. She was bleeding high-paying sponsorships and sliding rapidly into total digital irrelevance, completely desperate for a new, shiny hook to drag her back into the spotlight. To them, I was not a lost daughter. I was a massive, untapped goldmine. I was the ultimate public relations salvation, a tearful, highly publicized reconciliation with the country's most powerful, trending media host would instantly restore their shattered credibility, attract new gullible investors, and flood their empty bank accounts with fresh capital. It has been a very long time. Eleanor, I said smoothly, injecting just a fraction of calculated warmth into my voice, flawlessly playing the role of the cautious but secretly hopeful daughter. I think it is time we finally sat down and talked. The relief on the other end of the line was palpable. I could almost hear the expensive champagne corks popping in their calculating minds. Oh, yes, of course, my darling. Name the time and place. We will fly out immediately. There is a private club in Beverly Hills, I told her, naming the most notoriously exclusive and outrageously expensive dining establishment in the city. I will have my assistant send you the details for dinner this Friday. I ended the call and let out a soft, dark laugh. They honestly thought they were reeling me in. They thought they had found the perfect, gullible savior to wipe away their towering debts and polish their tarnished crowns. They were marching straight toward the stage, completely blind to the fact that I had already built the cage. The private dining room at the club was a masterclass in quiet, intimidating wealth. The walls were lined with dark mahogany. The lighting was deliberately dim, and the air smelled faintly of expensive leather and aged bourbon. I arrived early, taking my seat at the head of the heavy oak table, perfectly positioned, facing the door. I knew the rules of power dynamics in these rooms better than anyone. They arrived exactly 20 minutes late, a pathetic, transparent attempt to establish dominance. When the heavy wooden doors finally swung open, the performance commenced. Eleanor rushed into the room first, draped in severe black silk and dripping in heavy, ostentatious diamonds that I knew for a fact were heavily insured and likely leveraged against a loan. She practically threw herself at me, wrapping her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating embrace that smelled sharply of synthetic roses and desperation. "Look at you!" Eleanor gasped, pulling back to frame my face with her manicured hands. "You are absolutely stunning. Natalie, a true television star. My beautiful, beautiful girl." Richard hovered right behind her, wearing a bespoke suit that was trying just a little too hard to command respect. He offered a practiced, solemn nod, placing a heavy hand on my shoulder as if trying to bestow some grand paternal blessing. "We are so incredibly proud of the empire you have built." "Sweetheart," Richard said, his voice thick with a carefully modulated tone of regret and awe. "It takes a Larson to conquer the media world like you have." I offered a perfectly calibrated, neutral smile, gently shrugging off their physical contact and gesturing to the empty chairs. The suffocating charade continued as the final two guests entered the room. Chloe glided in, wearing a delicate, pale designer dress that made her look fragile and innocent, the exact image she sold to her dwindling millions of online followers. Clinging to her arm was Julian Croft. Julian was everything I expected him to be. He was a venture capitalist with a jawline carved from pure arrogance and a tailored suit that cost more than a luxury sedan. He wore a heavy platinum watch that he constantly adjusted, making sure the light caught the diamonds on the bezel. He looked at me not as a sister-in-law, but as an annoying obstacle standing between him and a profitable quarter. We sat down, and the waiters poured glasses of vintage champagne that cost thousands of dollars a bottle. For the first 15 minutes, the air was thick with agonizing small talk. They praised my studio, my wardrobe, my ratings. They expertly danced around the 2 decades of absolute silence, treating my time in the state foster system as if it were simply an extended, quirky vacation abroad. But the pleasantries could only last so long when bankruptcy was breathing down their necks. It was Julian who finally dropped the facade. He set his crystal flute down on the table with a sharp, definitive clink, signaling the end of the family reunion. "Let us cut the sentimentality and get down to business. Natalie," Julian said, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the polished wood, "you are a busy woman, and we are heavily invested people. Your network wants a massive spectacle for your live finale. We are willing to give you exactly that." He reached into the breast pocket of his jacket and pulled out a thick, legal-sized envelope. With an infuriatingly smug expression, he slid 2 documents across the heavy wooden table until they stopped directly in front of my plate. The first was a heavy multi-page legal document. The second was a cashier's check. "That is a heavily ironclad non-disclosure agreement," Julian explained, his voice dripping with absolute authority. "And underneath it is a check for $2 million, cash, available for you to deposit by tomorrow morning." I looked down at the paper. The sum of $2 million was written out in elegant, sweeping ink. To a normal person, it was life-changing money. To Larson Capital, it was the last desperate scrap of liquidity they could scrape together to save their sinking ship. "Here is the arrangement," Julian continued, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Richard, Eleanor, and Chloe will appear live on your broadcast this Friday. They will play the grieving, loving family who finally tracked down their lost daughter. It will be the most emotional television event of the year. Your ratings will shatter every record on your streaming platform, cementing your legacy." He paused, letting the silence stretch before delivering his ultimatum. "In exchange, you sign that agreement. You are legally bound to absolute silence regarding the financial architecture of Larson Capital. You will not ask any questions about our internal restructuring. You will not mention our philanthropic funds, and you will certainly not launch one of your famous little television investigations into my personal business dealings. We give you the ratings of a lifetime, and you keep our financial ledgers completely out of your mouth." Chloe leaned over the table, her perfectly glossed lips twisting into a condescending, pitying smirk. "Just take the money, Natalie," Chloe chimed in, her voice sweet and thoroughly poisonous. "It is $2 million. You can buy a bigger apartment. You can finally stop acting so angry at the world. Just be a good girl. Play the part of the sister who was welcomed back with open arms. And let us all walk away from this as winners." They looked at me with varying expressions of predatory anticipation. They truly believed they had cornered me. They thought my entire career was built on cheap drama, that I was just another greedy media personality willing to sell my soul for a rating spike and a heavy paycheck. They thought their wealth was an impenetrable shield. I did not shout. I did not throw the champagne in Julian's perfectly moisturized face. I did not deliver a righteous monologue about the pain of my childhood. Instead, I simply smiled. It was a cold, quiet smile that did not reach my eyes. I reached into my bag, pulled out my heavy fountain pen, and uncapped it. I did not flip through the dense pages of legal jargon. I did not check the restrictive clauses or the financial penalties. I flipped straight to the very last page, pressed the gold nib to the paper, and signed my name in smooth, dark ink. I slid the signed contract and the check back across the table toward Julian. Julian let out a loud, triumphant bark of laughter, snatching the contract up as if he had just won the lottery. Richard let out a massive sigh of relief, his shoulders visibly dropping, while Eleanor raised her glass of champagne with a victorious, teary-eyed smile. Chloe simply rolled her eyes, clearly satisfied that the stray dog had finally been brought to heel with a shiny bone. They were so completely intoxicated by their own perceived brilliance. They raised their glasses in a toast to family, completely and utterly blind to the reality of the situation. They thought they had just purchased my silence. They had no idea that they had just enthusiastically purchased their own front-row tickets to a public execution. Friday night arrived with the relentless momentum of a freight train. Exactly 45 minutes before my network broadcast the live feed to the entire globe, the air inside the primary VIP holding suite was so thick you could choke on it. Beyond the heavy soundproof doors, a crew of over 100 technicians was scrambling to finalize the stage. But inside the room, it felt like a pressurized cabin moments before structural failure. Eleanor was pacing frantically across the plush carpet. She had cornered my wardrobe assistant and was aggressively waving a flimsy, pale lavender chiffon dress in the air. It was a pathetic, sickly sweet garment designed to make the wearer look fragile, innocent, and entirely submissive. "You absolutely must wear this." "Natalie," Eleanor insisted, shoving the hanger toward my chest. "Your current outfit is far too aggressive. The audience needs to see a soft, forgiving daughter who has finally found her way home, and you need to memorize these cue cards." She thrust a stack of thick paper into my hands. "We hired a top public relations firm to write these lines. They highlight exactly how much emotional anguish your father and I endured when you ran away, and how much we sacrificed to keep looking for you." I did not take the dress. I did not take the cards. I stood perfectly still, looking at my reflection in the vanity mirror. I was wearing a meticulously tailored, razor-sharp crimson suit. It was the color of arterial blood and absolute, undeniable authority. I adjusted my cuffs and turned to face her, my expression completely blank. "I am wearing red," I stated simply, "and I do not read from unauthorized scripts." Richard stepped forward, his face flushing with a sudden, ugly surge of patriarchal anger. The polished gentleman routine was slipping, revealing the desperate tyrant underneath. "You will listen to your mother right now," Richard hissed, dropping his voice to a threatening gravel. He pointed a heavy finger at my face. "We gave you a $2 million check. We signed your ridiculous ironclad agreement. You are going to put on that dress. You are going to walk out there, and you are going to show some respect. If you try to embarrass us, I will walk out of this studio and take my family with me, and your precious live finale will be a complete disaster." Before I could reply, the heavy door to the green room swung open with a violent crack that echoed off the walls. My security guard stepped aside. A woman walked into the room. It was Margaret Vance. She was no longer the exhausted state social worker in a frayed beige cardigan and scuffed shoes. Tonight, Margaret wore a dark, impeccably tailored charcoal suit that screamed federal power. Her silver hair was pulled back into a severe style, and her posture was as unyielding as a steel beam. She possessed the terrifying, quiet aura of a high-ranking official who could dismantle a corporation with a single phone call. Eleanor turned around to yell at the intruder, but the words died in her throat. Her eyes locked onto Margaret's face. I watched the exact moment my mother's brain processed the memory. I watched her recognize the unsmiling woman who had sat across from her 20 years ago. The woman who had calmly stamped the legal documents permanently severing their parental rights. Eleanor took a trembling step backward, her perfectly contoured face draining of all color. But it was not the familiar face from the past that made her heart stop. It was the object securely clipped to the lapel of Margaret's expensive blazer. It was a heavy, gleaming identification badge. Richard followed his wife's horrified gaze. His eyes narrowed, struggling to read the gold lettering under the harsh fluorescent lights of the dressing room. Then, the realization hit him like a physical blow. The badge bore the official seal of the United States Securities and Exchange Commission. Below the seal, the engraved title read, "Regional Director of Enforcement." Absolute, paralyzing panic crashed over them. The sheer gravity of the trap finally snapped into focus. The $2 million check, the non-disclosure agreement, the sudden eagerness to put them on a live television broadcast. The pieces connected in Richard's mind, and his knees physically buckled. He reached out to grab the edge of the makeup counter to keep from collapsing. They were completely trapped, and they finally knew it. I closed the distance between us, stepping right into their personal space. The scent of Eleanor's expensive perfume was now soured by the sharp, undeniable stench of cold sweat. "You have exactly one choice tonight," I whispered, my voice dangerously soft, slicing right through their terror. "You are going to walk out onto that stage. You are going to sit on the guest couch, and you are going to smile brightly for the cameras. If you refuse, if you make even the slightest move toward the exit, my security team will physically drag you out of this building, and I will let the federal agents waiting in the lobby deal with you immediately. Do you understand me?" Neither of them could speak. They were completely paralyzed by fear. The overhead speaker in the room crackled to life, breaking the suffocating silence. "Stand by," the stage manager's voice boomed through the intercom. "We are going live to the world in exactly 10 seconds. Guests to the floor, 10, 9, 8. I turned my back on them and walked toward the studio doors. Behind me, I could hear the heavy, dragging footsteps of my parents. They followed me out into the blinding glare of the studio lights, walking down the long corridor exactly like death row inmates taking their final, agonizing steps toward the guillotine, completely blind to the execution script that was waiting for them on the other side. The heavy red light on camera 1 flashed on. A booming voice from the control room echoed in my earpiece, informing me that we were officially live to 40 million viewers. The deafening roar of the live studio audience washed over the stage, a massive wave of applause and anticipation. I sat behind my sleek, black glass desk, the unquestioned commander of the space, directly opposite me, seated on a crescent-shaped white leather sofa, were my biological parents and my twin sister. The stage was bathed in an unforgiving, brilliant white light, capturing every microscopic twitch of their facial muscles. As soon as I offered the standard welcoming introduction, the theatrical performance commenced. It was a perfectly choreographed symphony of deceit. Chloe immediately took the lead, leaning forward with her hands clasped tightly together in her lap. Her doe-like eyes instantly filled with thick, glossy tears that threatened to spill over her perfectly applied makeup. "It has been 20 agonizing years," Chloe told the cameras, her voice trembling with manufactured fragility. Growing up without my twin sister felt like half of my soul had been violently ripped away. We drove through the streets for endless nights. My parents spent every waking hour crying, wondering if you were safe, wondering if you were warm. Eleanor flawlessly picked up the cue, reaching over to grip Chloe's hand. A single, dramatic tear traced its way down her cheek. We never locked the front door. Natalie, we kept the porch light burning every single night for 20 long years, praying to whatever higher power would listen that our brave, rebellious little girl would find her way out of the dark and come back to our arms. We love you so much. Richard completed the trinity of manipulation, nodding slowly, burying his face in his hands to hide his supposedly overwhelming emotion. The live studio audience, packed with over 500 easily swayed spectators, completely bought it. I could hear the distinct sound of people sniffling in the front rows. Individuals were wiping their eyes. The collective empathy of the room was entirely on their side. They were winning the narrative. Exactly as they had planned in the green room, I sat perfectly still, letting their lies hang in the air for a few heavy, excruciating seconds. I did not interrupt them. I did not raise my voice. I remembered the heavy, legally binding non-disclosure agreement I had signed just days prior. The contract explicitly forbade me from uttering any disparaging statements, making any personal accusations, or vocalizing any sensitive financial data regarding their businesses. It was an ironclad muzzle, designed to ensure my complete verbal compliance, but they severely underestimated the nature of my compliance. I was going to follow their rules with absolute, terrifying precision. I did not need to hurl insults to destroy them. I only needed the truth. I smiled warmly at Eleanor, a smile completely devoid of any actual human affection. Then, without saying a single word, I reached out and firmly pressed a small red button on the digital tablet embedded in my desk. Instantly, the massive, 60-foot digital light-emitting diode screen that served as the backdrop for the entire studio shifted. The vibrant graphic of my show logo vanished. In its place, towering over the stage, appeared a high-resolution scan of a highly classified legal document. The studio audience went dead silent. The text was massive, undeniable, and stark. It was the official state relinquishment of parental rights form. "I am so glad we are discussing the past," I said smoothly, my voice echoing through the massive studio. "Because our viewers absolutely love verifying the facts. Behind me is a legally verified document from the state family court." The camera zoomed in tightly on the bottom of the screen. There, magnified to 20 times their actual size, were the sharp, distinct signatures of Richard Larson and Eleanor Larson. Beside their names was the date, and the checked box indicating the reason for abandonment: severe financial inability to care for a child. Before anyone could process the shock, I swiped my finger across the tablet again. A second document appeared right next to the court order. It was a bank transfer receipt from Larson Capital, dated the exact same day, the exact same hour, that I was dropped off at the state facility. The receipt clearly showed a transfer of $50,000 paid directly to a premier Hollywood talent agency and a child acting coach exclusively for Chloe Larson. The transition in the room was violent. The sympathetic sniffling abruptly stopped, replaced by a massive collective gasp from 500 people. The shock rippled through the audience like an electric current. Murmurs of disbelief quickly escalated into loud, angry mutters. On the couch, the transformation was catastrophic. Chloe's fake tears instantly evaporated, her mouth dropping open in sheer horror. Eleanor physically recoiled, pressing herself against the back of the sofa, as if the screen behind her was radiating intense heat. Richard's face turned the color of wet ash. Down in the front row of the VIP section, Julian Croft completely lost his mind. The arrogant, composed venture capitalist vanished. He vaulted out of his seat and charged aggressively toward the edge of the elevated stage, his face contorted in absolute rage. "Cut the feed," Julian screamed, wildly waving his arms at the camera operators. "Cut the absolute broadcast right now. This is illegal. You signed a non-disclosure agreement. I will sue you for everything you own. I will drag you through federal court until you are entirely bankrupt. You are in direct violation of a $2 million contract." The camera operators did not flinch. They kept their heavy lenses focused squarely on the chaos, broadcasting Julian's manic meltdown to 40 million screens around the world. I slowly stood up from my desk. I looked down at Julian, who was practically foaming at the mouth. I felt no fear, only the icy satisfaction of a perfectly executed trap. "You should really read the contracts you draft." "Julian," I said, my voice slicing clearly through his unhinged screaming, "the non-disclosure agreement explicitly prohibits me, Natalie Larson, from making any claims or exposing any financial ledgers. And as everyone can plainly see, I have not made a single accusation. I have not insulted anyone. However, that incredibly expensive piece of paper does not prohibit a sworn government official from presenting fully transparent, unsealed state records to the American public." Julian froze, his jaw practically unhinging as my words sank in. He looked from me to the massive screen, realizing the fatal loophole he had so arrogantly missed. I turned away from his horrified face and addressed the main camera, my voice ringing with finality. "Ladies and gentlemen," I announced, projecting my voice over the rising uproar of the studio audience, "I promised you the most explosive investigative broadcast of the decade. To help us break down the rest of the documents we have acquired, please welcome my very special guest, the Regional Director of Enforcement for the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, Margaret Vance." The heavy steel double doors at the center of the stage slid open, and Margaret stepped out into the blinding lights. The trap was completely sprung. The doors were permanently locked, and there was absolutely nowhere left for them to run. Margaret Vance took her seat at the polished glass desk. She did not cast a single glance at the trembling figures cowering on the white leather sofa. She was not there to litigate a tragic family reunion or entertain their manufactured sorrow. She opened a massive, heavily tabbed leather binder, and with the clinical precision of a seasoned federal regulator, she dropped the ultimate financial bombshell. "Following a comprehensive 14-month investigation," Margaret announced, her voice projecting absolute authority across the silent studio. The Securities and Exchange Commission has officially determined that Larson Capital, along with the affiliated philanthropic foundation registered under Chloe Larson, is not a legitimate investment vehicle. It is a highly sophisticated, fraudulent Ponzi scheme encompassing tens of millions of dollars. The collective gasp from the audience was deafening. Our forensic accountants have traced every single transaction, Margaret continued, ruthlessly cutting through the rising murmur. The charitable donations meant for global wellness initiatives were systematically funneled into offshore accounts. That public money was utilized exclusively to cover the catastrophic, highly leveraged corporate debts and illegal, unregulated private equity ventures spearheaded by Julian Croft. As of this morning, every piece of financial evidence, every doctored ledger, and every wire transfer receipt has been successfully handed over to federal law enforcement. Absolute, unadulterated chaos erupted. The heavy acoustic doors at the rear of the studio burst open. The red broadcasting lights caught the stark, bold yellow lettering on the dark windbreakers of the federal agents swarming into the room. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived, and they were executing the arrest warrants live on national television. The aristocratic, loving family facade disintegrated instantly. They turned on each other like cornered, starving animals. Richard leapt off the sofa, wildly pointing an accusatory finger at his wife, screaming at the top of his lungs that Eleanor was the one who illegally managed the charity accounts. Eleanor shrieked back, her face twisted in ugly raw terror, loudly blaming him for the initial corporate failures that forced them into fraud. Chloe threw herself at Julian, hysterically begging her husband to do something, to call his powerful friends and fix the disaster. Julian did not offer any comfort. He violently shoved his weeping wife aside, nearly knocking her to the studio floor, as he frantically punched numbers into his mobile phone, screaming obscenities at his private defense attorney. It took less than 10 minutes. In under 10 minutes, the majestic, impenetrable empire of the Larson family was completely crushed into dust before the eyes of 40 million viewers. The crisp, arrogant $2 million check still sitting in my dressing room was no longer a tool of manipulation. It was nothing more than a worthless scrap of paper signed by a man who was about to spend the rest of his natural life in a federal penitentiary. I did not laugh. I did not hurl a single insult or deliver a triumphant speech. I did not need to. The universe had finally balanced the scales. I calmly reached behind my neck, unclipped my earpiece, and switched off my microphone, laying it gently on the glass desk. The show was over. My work was completely finished. I walked around the desk and extended my hand to Margaret. She smiled, a genuine, warm expression that she reserved exclusively for me, and took my arm. Together, we turned our backs on the stage. We walked down the central aisle of the studio, ignoring the blinding, relentless flashes of the press photographers who had breached the security perimeter. Behind me, the frantic, pathetic screams of the people who shared my blood faded into background noise. I pushed open the heavy exit doors and stepped out into the crisp, cool Los Angeles night. The city lights sparkled like diamonds against the dark sky. I took a deep breath of the fresh air, feeling a profound, absolute sense of peace. I was entirely free, beautifully clean, and completely unbeatable. Thank you so much to all of our amazing listeners for staying with me until the very end of this journey. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please let me know your city and country in the comments. If you enjoyed today's story and want to help our channel survive, please consider supporting our hardworking team with just $1. Your kindness ensures we can feed our families and keep creating high-quality stories for you. You can easily donate by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen, or by clicking the secure PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below. Thank you for your generosity, and I will see you in the next story.